Look at her, so serious. Ha ha ha! The maid! What a joke!
Excuse me?
Hey, maid, you look a bit lost. Yeah, what's with the fancy tray? Maybe she's too good for us.
You dare to challenge me?
I accept your challenge.
The karate dojo sat far from the city, hidden behind tall iron gates and rows of old pine trees. It was built on a quiet estate where no neighbor could hear raised voices or broken bones. Inside, the room was wide and spotless. Polished cedar walls reflected soft white light. The floor mats were clean and firm, carrying the faint smell of wax and old incense. Everything about the place spoke of money, power, and control. This was not a school for beginners. It was a playground for men who believed they ruled others. At the center of that world stood Kong Daehyun. Kong was not just a martial artist. He was a syndicate leader, feared far beyond the walls of the dojo. His power did not come only from his fists, but from the way people lowered their eyes when he entered a room. He wore confidence like armor. Every movement he made carried the belief that nothing and no one could touch him. That morning, Kong wore a pristine white gi. It fit him perfectly, clean and unwrinkled. Around his waist was a black belt, tied with sharp, practiced precision. The knot sat straight, proud, and tight, a symbol of decades of training and the authority he demanded others respect. He rolled his shoulders once, slowly, enjoying the attention. Around the edge of the mat, his loyal henchmen gathered. They were young, strong men with scarred knuckles and expensive watches. Some leaned against the wall. Others sat on their heels, laughing loudly. Their eyes followed Kang's every move, ready to cheer, ready to agree, ready to laugh at whatever joke he chose to make. Their laughter filled the room and bounced off the wooden walls, loud and cruel, feeding Kang's ego like fuel on a fire. To them, Kong was untouchable. Near the corner of the dojo stood Margaret Hale. She wore a dark blue maid's uniform, simple and stiff, meant for work, not attention. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense bun. She held a tray with water bottles and folded towels, balanced carefully in both hands. Margaret was middle-aged, her face lined with quiet patience and long hours of labor. She blended into the background so well that most days, no one truly noticed her at all. Margaret arrived before sunrise. She cleaned the showers, scrubbed the mats, wiped the mirrors, and arranged the towels. She left long after midnight, when the last drink was poured and the last man stumbled out. For 3 years, she had worked like this, seen but unseen, present but ignored. To Kong and his men, she was part of the building, no more important than the walls she cleaned. Kong turned suddenly, his eyes landing on her. "Hey, Margaret," he called out, his voice smooth and mocking. The room quieted just enough to hear him clearly. "You've been cleaning these mats for years now." A few men snorted. Others smiled, already sensing where this was going. "You've watched us train," Kong continued. "Watched us sweat. Watched us bleed. Tell me," he paused, enjoying the moment. "Do you think you've learned enough to give me a little exercise?" The room exploded with laughter. Men slapped their thighs. Someone whistled. Someone else shook his head, as if the idea was too funny to believe. They saw only a maid in a blue uniform, a woman whose hands smelled of bleach and soap. They did not see anything else. Margaret did not laugh. She did not apologize. She did not shrink. She walked calmly to a low bench and set the tray down with steady hands. Not a single bottle rattled. Her movements were smooth and careful, without rush or fear. When she stepped forward, her feet landed flat, and even on the mat. Her weight was balanced, quiet, controlled. Her shoulders were relaxed, her spine straight. These were small details. No one noticed them. Kong raised his hand and curled one finger, beckoning her forward like a child. "Come on," he said, smiling. "Just a joke. Show the boys what you've learned." The laughter returned, louder now. The mockery was thick in the air, heavy and confident. This was entertainment. This was humiliation dressed as humor. Margaret stepped closer. She did not look at the men laughing. She did not look down at the floor. Her eyes were calm, steady, focused straight ahead. Her feet settled into place without noise. Her stance was natural, grounded, and still, as if she were standing on solid earth instead of padded mats. For a brief moment, something changed. It was not loud. No one could explain it. The laughter softened just slightly. The air felt heavier, cooler. A strange quiet slipped in between breaths. No one knew why. They only knew that something felt different. Kong did not notice. Or if he did, he ignored it. He stepped back, spreading his arms wide, still smiling, still in control. To him, this was only a joke. Margaret stood at the edge of the mat, facing him. The mockery still ruled the room. But the shift had already begun. Margaret stopped at the edge of the mat. Without a word, she bent down and removed her shoes. They were plain black work shoes, worn thin from years of walking hard floors. She placed them neatly beside the bench. When she straightened, her bare feet touched the mat. The skin was rough and calloused, not soft or delicate. They were the feet of someone who stood for long hours, someone used to pressure and weight. The men noticed. A few chuckled again, encouraged by the sight. The mood shifted back toward mockery, as if they had almost lost it for a second. "Look at her feet," someone laughed. Min Junho leaned forward, loud and proud, making sure his voice carried. "Careful, Auntie. Don't slip. These mats are for fighters, not cleaners." He grinned, pleased with himself. Maybe she'll sweep the floor with her face instead of a mop. Laughter followed, sharp and careless. Margaret did not look at him. She did not respond to any of them. Her eyes were on Kong Daehyun. She watched him closely, not his face, but his body. The way his shoulders sat, the angle of his hips, the way his weight rested slightly forward instead of centered. Her gaze moved lower, calm and focused. She saw the slight tremble in his left knee when he shifted his stance. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. An old injury. One he tried to hide with confidence and noise. Kong shifted again, unaware he was being studied like a problem waiting to be solved. Margaret's chin lifted just a little. As she moved, the collar of her uniform shifted. For a brief second, a small silver pin became visible beneath the fold of fabric. It was shaped like a bird in flight. Simple, clean, easy to miss. Then the collar settled again, hiding it from most eyes. Not all eyes. In the far corner of the dojo stood Master Seo Jinte. He had been quiet the entire time, arms folded, watching. His expression had not changed when the joke started. But now his posture straightened. His gaze fixed on Margaret's hands. They hung loosely at her sides. Relaxed. Still. Her breathing was slow. Even. Controlled. Seo Jinte felt a tightness in his chest. He had seen that kind of stillness before long ago, in places where mistakes were paid for in blood. He said nothing, but his attention sharpened. Kong stepped forward, rolling his neck once. "All right," he said, smiling again, though the smile was thinner now. "Let's make this interesting." He began to move. He threw a series of fast punches into the air, sharp and loud. His fists snapped forward and pulled back quickly. His GI cracked with each movement. He added a spinning kick, stopping just short of Margaret's space, letting the wind of it brush past her. It was all for show. Speed. Power. Performance. The men cheered. That's how it's done. Boss is warming up. Kong circled her, light on his feet, eyes narrowed. He was waiting for her to flinch. Waiting for her to raise her hands badly. Waiting for fear. Margaret did nothing. She did not step back. She did not lift her arms. She did not move at all. She stood as if rooted to the floor. The cheering slowed. Kong stopped in front of her. "What's wrong?" he sneered. "Forgot how to move without a broom in your hand?" A few men laughed again, but the sound was weaker this time. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Low. Clear. "Your stance is wide," she said. "Your weight is drifting to the right." The words landed wrong. Not rude. Not loud. Just exact. Kong froze. "You rely too much on your front foot," Margaret continued, her eyes still on his posture, not his face. "If you strike now, you will lose your balance." Silence dropped into the room like a heavy object. No one laughed. No one spoke. Kang's face flushed, red spreading across his cheeks and neck. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward his men, searching for agreement, for laughter, for anything to save his pride. There was nothing. His ego cracked, thin and sharp. "You think you can lecture me?" he hissed. Before anyone could react, Kong shoved her. Not a strike. Not technique. Just anger. Margaret moved. She turned on her heel, smooth and precise, stepping just enough to let his force pass through empty space. Kong stumbled forward, his foot sliding. He reached down quickly, slapping his palm against the mat to stop himself from falling. The sound echoed. Kong straightened slowly, breathing hard. The men stared. Kong had not fallen, but he had not stood tall either. Confusion spread across their faces. Unease followed. The joke was no longer funny. Kong Daehyun straightened slowly after the stumble. His palm left the mat, and he rolled his shoulder as if loosening a stiff joint. A short laugh escaped his mouth, forced and sharp. "A fluke," he said quickly. "You got lucky." His words were loud, meant for the room, not for Margaret. He wanted the men to hear confidence, not doubt. He adjusted the knot of his black belt and stepped back, widening the space between them. This time, there was no smile. Kong lowered his center of gravity and raised his hands. His feet spread with intention. His posture tightened. This was no longer a joke stance. This was how he faced opponents who mattered. The playful bounce disappeared, replaced by focus and anger. His eyes locked onto Margaret, sharp and calculating. The room grew quiet. Margaret lifted her hands. She did not copy his stance. Her arms rose slowly, without tension. One hand stayed open, fingers slightly curved. The other hovered closer to her body, guarding without stiffness. Her elbows were relaxed. Her shoulders stayed low. Nothing about it looked aggressive, yet nothing about it looked weak. It was unfamiliar. In the corner, Master Seo Jintae's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened as he leaned forward slightly, his attention narrowing. He knew that guard. It was not from tournaments or gyms. It was not something taught to impress crowds. It was something else. Something older. Something designed for endings, not displays. The empty cradle. Seo Jintae felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen it only once before, decades ago, when men trained not to win points, but to survive. His lips parted, but no words came out. Margaret spoke first. "You should stop," she said quietly. Her voice did not rise. It did not threaten. It was steady and controlled. "You're already favoring your leg," she continued. "If you push harder, you will injure yourself." Kang's jaw tightened. "You think I need advice from a cleaner?" he snapped. The warning did not land. Pride blocked it completely. With a sharp exhale, Kong exploded forward. His body turned, hips driving the motion as he launched a powerful roundhouse kick toward Margaret's ribs. The kick was fast and heavy, the kind meant to break bone. The fabric of his GI snapped loudly through the air. The men gasped. Margaret moved. She did not step away from the kick. She stepped into it. Her timing was exact. She closed the distance before the kick could reach full power. One palm touched Kang's hip, guiding his momentum. The other pressed lightly against his chest, not striking, not shoving, just redirecting. Her movement was smooth, almost gentle, but perfectly aligned with his own force. Kang's balance vanished. His supporting leg buckled under the sudden shift. His body folded, strength turning against itself. He crashed to the mat on his side, the impact loud and final. The air was driven from his lungs in a sharp, broken sound. He lay there, gasping. For a moment, no one moved. Kang's black belt had twisted loose, no longer sitting proud at his waist. It lay crooked against his hip, wrinkled and useless, like a symbol stripped of meaning. The dojo had gone completely silent. Eyes that once looked at Kong with admiration now stared at him in shock. Mouths hung open. The men were no longer watching a fight. They were witnessing a collapse. Kong rolled onto his hands and knees, coughing as he dragged air back into his chest. His face was red, his eyes wide. Confusion mixed with anger, then shifted into something sharper, panic. He pushed himself up too fast. "You," he started, his voice cracking. He staggered, then caught his balance, rage flaring hot and wild. He spun back toward Margaret, fists clenched, breath uneven. His movements were no longer controlled. The calm confidence was gone. The men felt it. Something had changed. They were no longer afraid of losing Kang's favor. They were afraid of what they had just seen. Fear began to slide away from Margaret and toward Kong himself. Not fear of his strength, but fear of his weakness. Kong stood there, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on Margaret. For the first time, he understood. He was not facing a maid. He was not facing a joke. He was facing someone far beyond him. And there was nothing he could do about it. Kong Daehyun's breathing was rough and uneven. Sweat clung to his temples as he stood facing Margaret. The room felt tight, as if the walls had moved closer. His pride was no longer bruised. It was shattered. In that broken space, something darker took control. His right hand moved toward his waist. It was a small movement, quick and desperate, but it did not go unnoticed. Fingers slipped beneath the fold of his GI, reaching for something hidden against his lower back. Steel did not flash. Ceramic did. A small ceramic knife appeared in his grip, pale and sharp, designed to cut without sound. The moment the blade became visible, the room reacted as one. Gasps ripped through the silence. Bodies stiffened. This was no longer a spar. This was no longer sport. This was death stepping onto the mat. "Boss, don't," Min Junho said, his voice weak and cracking. He took a half step forward, then stopped, frozen by fear. Kong did not hear him. With a snarl of rage, Kong lunged forward. The knife came toward Margaret's side in a fast, panicked thrust. There was no technique in it. Only desperation. Only wounded pride screaming for control. Margaret moved before the blade could reach her. Her reaction was not wide or dramatic. She stepped in close, closing the distance instead of retreating. Her hand caught Kang's wrist with precise placement. Her thumb pressed into a specific point just below the joint. The pressure was exact, measured, and mercilessly effective. Kang's fingers went numb. The knife slipped from his grip. It hit the mat with a sharp, hollow sound and skidded away, spinning once before coming to rest between them. Margaret did not stop. She shifted her position smoothly, stepping behind Kong in one clean motion. Her arm came around his upper chest, not squeezing his throat, not choking him. It was a loose hold, but perfectly placed. Her other hand rested against his shoulder, controlling his balance. Kong froze, unable to move, unable to strike, unable to turn. He was trapped without pain, without force, without struggle. Margaret leaned in slightly, her voice low but clear enough for the front row to hear. "The problem with pride," she said calmly, "is that it makes you predictable." Kang's breath shook. "You rely on fear to hold you up," she continued. "When it disappears, so does your balance." The words were not angry. They were not cruel. They were simple truth, delivered without emotion. That was what broke him. Margaret released her hold and stepped back. She did not push him hard. Just enough. Kang's legs failed him. He dropped to his knees, hands falling uselessly to his sides. His head bowed forward, as if the weight of his own name had become too heavy to carry. He was not bleeding. Nothing was broken. Yet something inside him had collapsed completely. The room remained silent. Master Seo Jinte moved. He stepped out from the corner slowly, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Margaret. When he reached her, he stopped 3 feet away. Then, without hesitation, he bowed. It was deep, full, a 90-degree bow reserved for masters beyond rank. The men stared, stunned. Seo Jinte's voice trembled. "They said you were gone," he said. "That you disappeared." He lifted his head slightly, eyes filled with awe. The lioness of the soul. The title hung in the air like a bell struck once. Margaret wiped a small line of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her expression softened, returning to the quiet calm she had worn all along. "I retired," she said simply. "I wanted a quiet life." She glanced at the fallen knife, then at the kneeling man, then at the watching crowd. "I clean floors now," she added. "They are easier to fix than people." She turned toward the men who stood frozen along the walls. "The floor is clean," Margaret said evenly. "Keep it that way." No one answered. No one laughed. She walked to the bench, picked up her tray, and headed toward the door. Her footsteps were light, steady, unhurried. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The dojo felt empty. Kong remained on his knees, head bowed, while the men stood in stunned silence. Power had not been taken from him. It had left him on its own. Kong Daehyun remained on his knees long after Margaret had left the dojo. His hands rested on his thighs, but they trembled uncontrollably. His head stayed bowed, not in respect, but in shock. The mat beneath him felt unfamiliar now, as if it no longer belonged to him. Every breath he took was shallow and uneven, as though the room itself was pressing down on his chest. Around him, the henchmen stood frozen. Their eyes were not on Kong. They were fixed on the doorway. The same doorway through which the woman in the blue uniform had disappeared. Fear and awe mixed on their faces, replacing the laughter and arrogance that had filled the room only minutes earlier. No one spoke. No one dared to move. It felt as if a powerful presence still lingered in the air, watching them, judging them. Master Seo Jinte broke the silence. He stepped forward, his expression hard and controlled. His voice, when he spoke, was sharp with disappointment. "Look at yourselves," he said. "You came here every day to learn how to hurt people. You treated this place like a playground for cruelty." The men lowered their eyes. "She did not come here to fight," Seo Jinte continued. She came here to work. And still, she taught you something none of you ever learned. He looked slowly across the room, making sure every man felt his words. She showed you humanity. The weight of that sentence settled heavily on them. One by one, the henchmen began to leave. There were no jokes, no insults, no loud footsteps. They picked up their bags quietly and filed out of the dojo, avoiding each other's eyes. The space emptied in silence, as if sound itself had been driven out. The dojo doors had barely closed when a cane tapped softly against the floor. Chairman Kwon Sung-il entered. He was old, his back slightly bent, his movements slow but deliberate. His hair was white, and his eyes were clouded with age, yet sharp with awareness. He was the silent benefactor of the syndicate, a man whose power did not need to announce itself. He stopped near the center of the mat. His gaze lowered to the floor. He saw the faint scuff marks where feet had pivoted with precision. He saw the ceramic knife lying abandoned, its pale surface standing out against the mat. He inhaled slowly, as if the air itself carried a story. Who was here? Chairman Kwon asked, his voice dry but commanding. Master Seo Jinte stepped forward and bowed slightly. The maid, he said. Margaret Hale. The chairman's eyes widened. For the first time since entering, he smiled faintly. It was not a happy smile. It was a knowing one. So, Chairman Kwon said softly, she walked through here again. The younger men stiffened, confusion spreading across their faces. Seo Jinte lowered his head. Yes, sir. Chairman Kwon tapped his cane lightly on the mat. 20 years ago, he said, this country stood on the edge of collapse. Power was being stolen from the inside. The palace was surrounded. Leaders were falling. He paused, letting the silence grow. She was the reason the Blue House did not fall, he continued. A shadow that moved where no one could see. A protector without a name. While others fought for recognition, she chose duty. The room felt colder. The men began to understand. The woman you mocked, Chairman Kwon said, is the reason you live in the world you take for granted. Shock rippled through the remaining henchmen. Their faces drained of color. The weight of their laughter, their insults, their cruelty crashed down on them all at once. They had not mocked a maid. They had mocked a legend. A ghost from a forgotten war. A door creaked open near the locker room. Kong emerged. He was no longer wearing his GI. He stood in a simple dark suit, his black belt nowhere in sight. His posture was smaller now, uncertain. The fire that once filled his eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow and searching. He looked around the dojo, then toward the hallway. She's gone, Kong said quietly. Chairman Kwon did not turn. Yes, he replied. She always leaves before anyone knows how much they owe her. Kong swallowed hard. His fists clenched at his sides, not with anger, but with regret. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. He did not look back. Kong Daehyun was going to find Margaret Hale. Kong Daehyun found Margaret in the small break room at the end of the hallway. The room was narrow and plain, lit by a flickering fluorescent light. A plastic table stood in the corner, along with two mismatched chairs. Margaret sat on one of them, holding a cup of tea with both hands. Steam rose slowly from the surface. Her shoes were back on. Her uniform was neat. She looked calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Kong stopped at the doorway. For a long moment, he said nothing. The man who once filled rooms with fear now stood unsure of where to place his feet. His shoulders were lowered. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet. I didn't know, Kong said. I treated you like you were nothing. Margaret did not look up. I thought respect came from power, he continued. From fear. I was wrong. She took a small sip of her tea before answering. You didn't need to know who I was, Margaret said evenly. You only needed to see who I am. Kong swallowed. I failed. She finally raised her eyes to him. They were steady, without anger or pride. Respect, Margaret said, should not depend on fear. If people obey you only because they are afraid, then you are already standing alone. The words settled heavily in the room. Kong took a step forward. Then tell me, he said. What should I do? Margaret set her cup down carefully on the table. She stood, smoothing the front of her uniform. You start by cleaning, she said. Kong blinked. Cleaning. The dojo, she replied. The floors. The showers. Everything. He nodded slowly, accepting the weight of it. Tomorrow, Margaret added, you arrive at 5 in the morning. Not to train. To scrub. She picked up her tea again, signaling the conversation was over. Kong bowed his head slightly. Then he turned and left without another word. The next morning, the sky was still dark when the iron doors of the dojo opened. Kong was already there. He wore plain gray sweats and an old jacket. His expensive watch was gone. His shoes were simple. He stood quietly near the entrance, hands at his sides, waiting. Soon, footsteps followed. 5 senior henchmen entered behind him. They looked different too. No silk shirts. No jewelry. No confident smiles. Their clothes were plain, their expressions serious. One by one, they removed what little luxury remained on them and placed it aside. Margaret arrived shortly after. She carried a cart filled with buckets, mops, brushes, and cleaning cloths. She did not look surprised to see Kong and the others waiting. Without ceremony, she handed out supplies. A mop to Kong, buckets to the others. Brushes and cloths were needed. No one spoke. Water sloshed softly as buckets were filled. Brushes scraped against tile. The sound of scrubbing filled the space where laughter once lived. Sweat formed again, but this time it came from effort, not ego. Kong knelt on the floor, scrubbing the same mat where he had fallen. His movements were slow but focused. No one mocked him. No one watched for weakness. They worked. As the sun rose, younger fighters began to arrive. They stopped at the door. They stared. Their feared leader was on his knees, cleaning. The men who once shouted orders were silent, working with their hands. The dojo felt different. Heavy but clean. One of the younger men set down his bag. He removed his shoes. "Can I help?" he asked quietly. Margaret handed him a cloth. Then another arrived. And another. Soon, the room was full of movement. No orders were given. No voices were raised. The work spread naturally, one person following another. The floor grew brighter. The air felt lighter. By the time the sun fully rose, the dojo no longer felt like a place of cruelty. It felt like a place of effort. Margaret watched them work, then picked up a mop herself and joined in. No one questioned it. No one laughed. The culture of the dojo had begun to change. Weeks passed, and the dojo changed. The loud laughter that once filled the space was gone. In its place was a steady, focused silence. Training sessions began on time. Shoes were lined neatly by the door. The mats were cleaned before and after every class. Voices were low. Movements were careful. The dojo no longer felt like a place of ego. It felt like a place of purpose. Kong Daehyun changed the most. One morning, he arrived carrying his black belt. He did not announce anything. He did not make a speech. He simply walked to the front of the room, placed the belt on the mat, and stepped away. When class began, he wore a white belt tied plainly around his waist. He sat at the back. Not as a leader. Not as a commander. As a beginner. He listened. He followed instructions. When corrected, he bowed his head and adjusted. No one laughed. No one questioned it. The men watched quietly, understanding that something deeper than rank was happening. Margaret Hale continued her work. She still wore her dark blue maid's uniform. She still arrived early and left late. She cleaned the floors, wiped the mirrors, and folded towels with the same steady care she always had. Nothing about her appearance changed, but everything about how she was treated did. Men stepped aside when she passed. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Voices lowered in her presence. When she spoke, people listened. When she worked, no one interrupted. She was no longer invisible. She was seen clearly, without needing to explain herself. One evening, after the dojo had emptied, Margaret stayed behind. The mats were clean. The lights were dim. The air smelled faintly of soap and wood. She walked to the center of the room and knelt. From her pocket, she removed the ceramic knife. It had been cleaned. The blade had been dulled carefully, its edge smoothed until it could no longer cut. Margaret placed it gently on the mat. It did not look threatening now. It looked quiet. Finished. She stood and stepped back. The knife stayed there, untouched. A reminder, not of danger, but of what arrogance could turn into when left unchecked. A symbol of power laid down and never picked up again. Margaret turned off the lights and walked toward the door. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. She stepped onto the path leading away from the dojo, her shoes making soft sounds against the ground. Before she left the gate, she stopped and looked back. Through the windows, she saw movement. Men were still inside. They were not training. They were cleaning. One wiped the mats. Another stacked towels. Someone adjusted shoes near the door. No one supervised. No one ordered them to do it. They worked together quietly, maintaining the space they had learned to respect. Margaret felt something settle inside her. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning a fight. Not the kind that comes from breaking someone else. The kind that comes from seeing change take root. She turned away and continued down the road, her uniform blending into the darkness. The world she left behind was not perfect, but it was better than before. And that was enough. Before this story ends, there is a question that remains. Who in your life do you overlook? Who stands quietly in the background, carrying strength you never bothered to see? True power does not shout. True mastery does not demand attention. Sometimes it cleans the floor, waits patiently, and changes the world without asking permission. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories.